the whole operations of the international community inside North Korea has been completely blocked. On top of that, we have the drastic reduction of people escaping from North Korea. According to the statistics from the Ministry of Unification in South Korea, in the first 6 months of this year, 2020, only 135 people escaped, comparing to more than 1,000 people who escaped last year. So we are losing eyes and ears to see and understand what is exactly going on in North Korea at the moment. Now, having said that, let me say, Greg, that what do we know? And I want to start with this as a matter of principle and bring in important statement from the report of the Commission of Inquiry of 2014, where they stated that policies, institutions, and patterns of impunity that lie at the heart of widespread and systematic human rights abuses remain in place. And I endorse in 2020 this important statement. The institutions remain in place. Minister of State Security, Minister of People Security, Korean People Army, Workers' Party of Korea, and the Supreme Leadership of North Korea and other institutions remain in place as it were at the times of the COI report. And in terms of policies and patterns, we know that the Songbong system, discriminatory system in the country remain in place. We know that the criminalization of descendants or people that just have different views continues. We know that the secretive political prison camps remain in place. Patterns of torture, not only in political prison camps, but in general, within the penitentiary system in North Korea continues. The pattern of torture of North Koreans in detention, the command economy, the lack of due process of law, the lack of any kind of accountability in the country, and the lack of freedoms. These are the patterns and the policies that remain in place. So this is very important to stress when we refer to the overall human rights situation in North Korea. Now, to be more specific, and I will take some more minutes if I may, the OHCHR office in Seoul recently launched a report of persons in detention after being repatriated by China and from China and by the government of China. And this report shows very clearly about this pattern of ill treatment and torture against those who have been repatriated. And this is very important, and it is something that we do know it's happening in North Korea at the moment, because the report is based on very recent testimonies from the recent escapees who gave their testimonies. Connected to that, we do know that the policy implemented by the government of China against those who escape remains as it has been in the last years, which is that they just consider these people illegal migrants, but they disregard, the government of China disregard their obligations under the conventions of refugees to consider these people refugees surplus and to comply with the principle of non-refoulement. This is some very serious human rights abuses connected to North Korea that we know it's happening at the moment. We do know that the COVID-19 drastically changed the context in which the state is operating, and this is providing new impetus to Pyongyang and to the government of North Korea to exert its authority over the local economy, especially the Jangmadang, the markets, and also over ordinary citizens. We just recently, or I just recently came to know that the body in charge of managing the quarantine in North Korea has somehow switched into kind of military command body, which also raises concern about how the government is asserting its authority over local population in North Korea. We do know, in addition, that the government of North Korea launched a new offensive wave against defectors and dissidents who left North Korea. That's has happened recently, and I expressed my serious concern about it, and we can further talk about it. But this is something that is happening now in the context of the COVID-19. We do know the seriousness of the issue of right to adequate food. Even before the pandemic, the 40% of the population in North Korea, according to UN agencies' reports, were suffering malnutrition, and they were they require humanitarian aid. 11 million of people in North Korea. It's very difficult to assess what is the situation now on the ground, especially for the people in the rural areas with regards to access to adequate food. It is of the utmost concern to look into this issue precisely because of the history of North Korea during the 90s with the famine that killed large number of people in the country. And the international community should be very aware about what could be the conditions at the moment. And then finally, going to your point about the COVID-19 and how the government is dealing with that, I welcomed in June 2012 in a statement the decision of the government towards trying to contain the outbreak of the virus in North Korea with a number of measures. And I think we should, at some point, try to support the initiatives from the government with this regard, because the COVID-19 has hit very seriously many countries and populations around the world. And if that happens, and that was going to be the case in North Korea, given the poor health conditions of a vast majority of the population and the poor infrastructure with regards to health in the country, the outbreak of the COVID-19 in major outbreak of the COVID-19 in North Korea could be a disaster. So we should be supporting that, but at the same time, of course, calling for North Korea to abide with their obligations, and the United Nations, especially the OHCHR, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, issued a number of guidance on how to combat the virus and tackle the virus. And I refer to my statement in June 2020 about it. So this is a very brief assessment of the situation, Greg, and to the audience. I am of the strong opinion that we should try to avoid further isolation of the country. It is our challenge, I think, as the international community, to avoid further isolation. It is not the answer. The government is going towards that, but COVID-19 struggle all over the world shows that it is with collaboration among states, with solidarity among states, that we will get away from this situation, and the government of North Korea should not be a part of this initiative. I will stop there, and I welcome more exchanges with you and the audience, Greg.
Tomás, thank you so much. That was a terrific overview of the current situation of human rights in North Korea, terrific overview of what a COVID-19 crisis might look like in North Korea. We have already received a lot of questions, and I'm going to invite the audience to submit questions, continue to submit questions via the chat function, or request the floor. We will give each participant no more than 1 minute to do that. But without further ado, let me go to the first two questions. They come from a Radio Free Asia reporter, Mrs. Yang Hee-jung. Number one, Tomás, have you sent official communications to the South Korean government that the investigation of South Korean human rights, defector NGOs, and the revocation of cooperation licenses by the South Korean Unification Ministry could possibly amount to political oppression or violation of their human rights? Number two, what is your position regarding the South Korean Ministry of Unification proceeding with preparation for legislation banning leaflet balloon launches into North Korea? These are not easy questions. We look forward to hearing from you, sir.
Not easy, but very important. And to respond to the first question, I have been officially involved on the issue of inspections of human rights NGOs and defectors organizations. You may know, and your audience should know, that I had an official meeting, virtual online meeting with the Ministry of Unification officials, 2 hours discussion, raising my concerns, putting petitions, and finally making a request to the Vice Minister of Unification to halt the process of inspections and audits against these organizations. So, and I have made many public statements with the media about it, and that's officially in my capacity as DPRK, a human rights reporter from the Human Rights Council. Now, with the mandate holders, we also have other tools to operate our mandates, and one of these tools are sending letter of allegations or urgent appeals to the governments in written statements. And I think that the first question refers to that. And I have said that we are working on a draft communication to the government of South Korea on this specific issue. We are trying to have on board some other thematic reporters from the Human Rights Council, in particular the special reporter on human rights defenders. So the communication has more weight and puts a clear message to the government of South Korea. So that's ongoing. We are working on a draft, and I cannot anticipate a specific timeline, but very soon I think it's going to be an answer with regards to this issue. And let me, before going to the question of leaflets, let me share with you, Greg, and your audience, why I am very concerned about the targeting of these human rights organizations and defectors organizations in particular. First, it is clear for me, and I made a point with the government, that the question on why only these organizations suddenly became subject to this kind of review, and why now, where the government was taking this decision, that questions were not responded by the government. And therefore, the concern remains about organizations being targeted under discrimination basis, and any kind of discrimination is against international human rights law. Now, my specific concerns with regard to this political decision of the South Korean government against especially defectors organizations It's because, and I said it before, when North Korea launched this offensive against defectors, the defectors are escapees from North Korea who faced serious human rights abuses. So they enjoy the entitlement of victims of human rights abuses. And because of that, they deserve protection and they deserve not to be re-victimized. And and then when we think about the community of defectors living in South Korea, we know that more than 30,000 of defectors are living now in South Korea, most of them women. Women who have been through a lot of distress and trauma because of what happened in North Korea and of what happened during the journey to South Korea. According to statistics from the Ministry of Unification, and I have some figures, well, many of these escapees are facing post-trauma because of their lives in North Korea. So this the decision of the government of South Korea to target defectors organizations, what is actually producing is more stigmatization of these defectors, and we should not be allowing that. Also, the targeting of defectors organizations is creating negative perception among public of their important role, the important role of defectors and human rights organizations. So we shouldn't be accepting this negative perception from the public coming from the decisions of the South Korean government. In addition, I would say that it also discourages and erodes the environment and condition for escapees to share their stories and their testimonies. You know, this is the decision of South Korea is making these kind of implications which are very negative for the work of many of us, including myself, because my reports and my narrative that I share with the United Nations are based mainly on the testimonies of defectors. So I see this of great concern, and of course all these measures from the South Korean government against the organizations, what is producing is reducing and impacting on the NGOs networks to access to information about the situation. Those NGOs who have connections to North Korea in the border area, you know, very sensitive, very fragile connections. All this goes against these challenges, which are, and their work is very important. And finally, the finger pointing of these organizations, the human rights organizations and these defectors organizations by the government of South Korea also undermines the work of those who are based in the border area in China, who are helping the escapees when they just cross the river and they find themselves alone with no help because the South Korean consulate usually do not engage directly with these persons. So they only rely on the help of pastors, Christian organizations that are suffering and seeing undermine their work by this policy from the government. So I finish with that with regards to the defectors, and very briefly on the balloons being sent to North Korea. I repeat what I said before, Greg and the colleague that made the question. It is for the National Assembly of South Korea to debate and to discuss to what extent there are reasonable grounds to ban the sending of leaflets cross-border. Of course, any legislation should comply with international human rights standards, and this is very technical, but they should comply with the principle of necessity and proportionality. So if you want to ban a very important exercise of freedom of expression, which includes the right to send information cross borders, you need to prove, you have the burden, the government has the burden to prove that there are no other alternatives but to ban balloons being sent in a certain area of the borderline with North Korea. And finally, the discussions at the National Assembly, that I think is the forum where they have to take place, they all should also include consultation with stakeholders and civil society organizations in advance and before approving any legislation.
Tomás, thank you very much. The next question comes from Mrs. Park Ji-hyun, who is in the UK, in London. She's a North Korean escapee and very well-known North Korean human rights activist. The point she makes is that COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting stateless populations, also refugees. Efforts to cope with COVID-19 are primarily focused on citizens only. Her concern is that, as you mentioned in your remarks, China continues to forcibly repatriate, arrest and forcibly repatriate North Korean refugees in direct violation of the 1951 UN Convention concerning the status of refugees and the 1967 additional protocol. Ji-hyun's question is, how does the UN help North Korean refugees in China or third countries, especially under these extraordinarily dire circumstances of the COVID-19 public health crisis, global pandemic?
As far as I am aware, the UNHCR, the refugee agency from the United Nations, do not have access to the border area in the Chinese side. And I was just referring about how these people, most of them women, as we say, women that usually face forced marriages, being trafficked for sex purposes, and the worst imaginable things that can happen to them. They only rely on the help of the civil society organizations working there. In some cases, the South Korean consulates engage with the local Chinese local authorities. This is something that I always discussed with the South Korean officials in my missions to Seoul. My concern about their role that they have to play there, the important role that the government of South Korea has to play in the border area. But the United Nations, I know that UNHCR has been pushing for more engagement with the Chinese government on how to treat these people and have access to the detention centers or the holding centers that sometimes they are put. But other than that, unfortunately, and of course myself, I have trying to engage with the Chinese authorities many times. In some occasions, there were positive encounters, but the overall conclusion about my engagement with the government of China is not good. I have even been asked not to mention any longer the issue of escapees being held in China. Completely unreasonable request for me. But this is a situation, dear colleague from London. We need to push more for the international community, for those who have a relationship with the Chinese government, to let the government of China know that this is an international responsibility coming from a treaty ratified for the government of China. They should demonstrate that they are a serious state that respects their own commitments. There is no reasonable response from the government of China about why they do not consider these refugees as these escapees as refugee surplus, or they comply with the non-refoulement principle. As I just mentioned, that the office of South Korea of the OECHR just a couple of weeks ago launched a report with concrete testimonies of what happens if you are repatriated to North Korea. Clear evidence, straightforward evidence. Why is it that the government of China do not comply with their obligation and use this report? So, public advocacy of this issue continues to be the only, for the time being, unfortunately, the only instrument that we have.
Thomas, speaking of refusal to engage, I actually have two questions from H.J. Park, who is a reporter with Voice of America. Mr. Quintana, Special Rapporteur, when was your last direct engagement or communication with the North Korean authorities, and what was it about? Second question, do you have any recommendations for the upcoming US administration, for the next US administration regarding North Korean human rights issues? So whether it's a Trump administration, a Biden administration, what would be your recommendations?
All right, very important issues for concerning the human rights situation in North Korea. Unfortunately, the government of North Korea rejects completely the country-specific resolution, as many other member states of the General Assembly, as well as of the Human Rights Council, that they reject country-specific resolutions, which are the resolutions that create country mandates like mine, and therefore they also reject my mandate. North Korea rejects my mandate. We know that it happened the same with my predecessor, dear Marzuki Dorsman, and also Bitin Montaron in the past. That has not been the position of all countries that have country-specific resolutions, like Myanmar. I traveled all over Myanmar. I visited 9 times Myanmar, and there are some other reporters that have the possibility at least to engage and to talk to the authorities. But that has not been the case with North Korea. Now, I have said, and I started this mandate 4 years ago, saying that I do believe in the importance of trying to reach out to the authorities and build cooperation. This mechanism, the human rights mechanism, which I hold, which is the special rapporteur, the mandate, has been created by the Human Rights Council with the idea to reach out the concerned country and seek cooperation, together with the important obligation of being vocal and denounce systematic and widespread human rights abuses. Those two elements are very important of the human rights mechanisms that I am hold. That's why I presented this strategy at the beginning of my mandate, the 2-track approach. And I will continue with this, and you should know that. I will always try to have a possibility to sit together with North Korean authorities and discuss the human rights agenda. Now, while this is not offering, for the time being, concrete results, I said that I will also play as a catalyst for other human rights bodies or institutions to engage with North Korea. And this is what I have been doing because I do believe that there is a possibility for North Korea to gradually start engaging with the United Nations on the human rights. So that's a response to the first question. I would like to further explain the issue of accountability. Maybe there is another question, Greg, for that. We can further talk about it. But let me talk about the U.S. administration, but also the South Korean administration, and by the way, the Japanese administration. We know that both South Korea and Japan decided in the last sessions at the Human Rights Council and the GA as well, not to become a pen holder and co-sponsor human rights resolutions regarding North Korea. And that was a mistake. And I made my point with the Japanese authorities very clear when I visited Tokyo last year, and also with South Korea. It was a mistake. You should not step back from an important call from the international community, which by consensus agreed that the human rights situation in North Korea is quite serious, continues to be serious, and the government of North Korea needs to change, and reform their institutions, their policies. So that's no longer the case. And I would like to take this opportunity to deliver this message to the South Korean authorities and the Japanese authorities. Similar to this was the decision of the US not to push for a meeting in New York to discuss the human rights in North Korea at the Security Council. Security Council is the most powerful body of the United Nations, with the legitimacy and the legality to impose sanctions, to even use the force against the states. And it is very important that the Security Council links their concerns of the nuclear program, the security in the Korean Peninsula, with human rights. And the US has been an important player some years ago by calling a meeting on this issue, but unfortunately, since 2 years ago, this hasn't happened. So I made also my call with the US representatives. I visited Washington at the end of last year. I met State Department officials, and I made my point. And I said that there is no need to step back on human rights concerns by trying to bring North Korea to the negotiations table. I don't see the point of that. I don't see the risks. I don't understand why you cannot ask North Korea to engage with, for example, with the special rapporteur, or ask North Korea to engage with the High Commissioner more of the High Commissioner for Human Rights more in the context of the denuclearization negotiations. I really don't, and my call to those who have been negotiating with North Korea continues to be the same. Please talk to us, talk to me. We will let you know what will be the best strategy to bring the human rights question into the negotiations table without jeopardizing your very important goal, which is to have denuclearization, a denuclearized peninsula. So this is my view with regard to the U.S. administration. We don't know what will happen with the elections. You know, that's a fact. You never know what's the outcome of the elections. It's difficult to trust in polls and etc. But I would recommend whatever administration assumes in the US, not to drop the possibility to seek negotiations with North Korea. And finally, one more point, Greg, connected to this. I do believe, and I said this in my last report to the Human Rights Council in March. In March, I was in Geneva reporting to the Human Rights Council. And I do believe that there is a need to open a space to discuss a peace agreement in the Korean Peninsula. I think that the peace agreement and the peace discussions would allow to have an atmosphere, an environment where then human rights issues could be raised with the parties. And I want to make my point here at this meeting.
Tomás, thank you very much. Next, I have a very interesting question actually from our colleague, Ethan Hee-Sok Shin, North Korean human rights defender in South Korea. And this question goes pretty much along your comments on accountability. Special Rapporteur Quintana, would you be willing to represent victims of North Korean human rights violations to bring crimes against humanity charges against North Korean leaders before an Argentinian court under the principle of universal jurisdiction in the future, as you did on behalf of a Rohingya group against the leaders of Myanmar for genocide last November?
Thank you, Ethan, for that straightforward question. I always like the way that you put, UN officials on this position. We need people like you to respond to these questions, and thank you for that. And I don't see why not, to be honest. Of course, we are talking about the future, and a lot of things could happen in the future. But I do not renounce to my commitment to seek justice. My own personal experience and the important experience of my country, and then my experience as a Myanmar reporter, where I with a lot of clarity recall meeting the authorities back in 2010 in Myanmar, and making a strong point about the necessity to address human rights violations from the past, whether it is through truth commissions or courts or wherever, because societies cannot be built by hiding, serious human rights abuses behind the carpet. And these are lessons learned. We know, the international community knows. We can sometimes, international community members could, cover their eyes or play as they are not listening, but we do know the information is there. The lessons that we learned are very clear, and who knows what will happen. For the time being, I'm holding this mandate, and my responsibility and obligation is to report on the human rights abuses and to try to seek improvement in the field. And for that, what I learned as a reporter in the past is that the possibility to go to the ground, to talk to the ordinary people, but also to talk to common authorities, intermediate authorities from different agencies, it's key. It's key to bring awareness, to build trust, to start process of cooperation, to provide assistance, technical cooperation, capacity building. I know that many of these words may sound nothing to some people, or especially to victims, but we have almost the most challenging situation in the world with regards to North Korea, and we need to see what are all opportunities there to improve the human rights situation.
Tomas, thank you. Speaking of straight shooters, I have a question from Doug Byun from South Korea's Yonhap News Agency. Is there a COVID-19 outbreak in North Korea? Please clarify. Thank you very much.
We know that there has been a case in Kaesong district next to the border with South Korea. That is what we know, and it was reported. Other than that, I don't have sources to say that there is an outbreak. And if there is an outbreak, what I can say is that it doesn't seem to me a major outbreak in the whole country of the COVID-19. But to the person who made the question, I usually don't want to base my statements on speculations. It doesn't work like that. I wish I could have the information about it, so then I can help the government and the people suffering from an outbreak of the COVID to overcome this situation so serious that is affecting the whole world. But I don't have the information, and it's not only me, it's the UN agencies. As I say at the opening statement, the UN agency, WHO, World Health Organization, UNICEF, OCHA. I had an interesting exchange this week with the representative from the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC. They have been all blocked from moving from Pyongyang and from the surroundings, and there's no operations and the information is not being shared. So again, problem of the isolation, we should not underestimate where North Korea seems to be going with regards to the isolation. We should invest all our wisdom to see how to open up the North Korea, because the experience about the country shows that when this happened in the past, afterward we saw a dramatic situation.
Thank you, Tomas. The next question comes from Director Sun Hunan, who is the wife of our late board member, Che Hunan, a great North Korean human rights defender, great personal mentor of mine, HRNK board member. The question is, why are there more women defectors than men leaving North Korea and resettling in South Korea? If they leave South Korea, where do they go?
Sorry, Greg. So the first question I got, at the last part, I was distracted. What was the last part?
The second question is, if these women, if these North Korean women leave South Korea after resettling in South Korea, where do they go? What countries do they choose?
Yeah. Okay. Why is it that most of them are women? Is a question that, of course, all of us, I mean, experts or those interested on the human rights situation have been asking to ourselves, because it's a clear pattern. You know, it's women going through the worst situations, finally reaching South Korea, and even living in South Korea under, you know, very complicated environment, having difficulties to integrate to the society. I was reading my notes of last year, and I recall the case of a North Korean SKP living in South Korea who died with her son of 5 years old in the middle of last year, and nobody. I mean, it passed days until someone noticed that death. It was terrible. You know, it was a very important example of what all these women are going through after living in North Korea. I should say that when I started with this mandate, I was really surprised in the good way on how the government and the institutions of South Korea treat the SKPs. So they provide them education, they provide instruments to integrate into the South Korean society, and they provide them services in some cases. And that's something that we need to praise from the people from South Korea and the institutions from South Korea, trying to contain North Koreans coming to the South. And I was also recalling a commitment made by this administration in South Korea with regards to the North Koreans arriving to the South, where they announced in September last year that they were going to do establish comprehensive measures to ensure social stability of North Korean defectors. And this came from the Minister of Gender Equality. We should follow up on that initiative. But anyhow, to respond to that question, there are some elements that I can share with you, but you can also do a research and look for some other answers. We don't have all the answers, but it seems that the fact that the women are not, most of the women are not assigned to job from the state, so they are not bound to the state because of state assigned jobs. They enjoy more possibility to make these kind of decisions of leaving the country. They do not face the pressure of responding to the state job assigned, and therefore they have more maneuver to make these decisions. Another reason that has been argued is that the kind of status of the women in North Korea, it is quite dramatic. It is quite dramatic. There has been a discussion in the recent years about, for example, the issue of sexual abuse, which was not contemplated as a crime, and there was no possibility to make complaints about sexual abuse, and women are subject to abuse at their home and also in the markets. There have been some reports about being subject to abuse to allow them to trade in the markets. So I'm pretty sure that the fact that the status of women is so dramatic in North Korea is also a reason that made them leave the country. Now, what I said, what I perceived when I started with the mandate, bringing an issue which is very important, which is the issue of separated families from the Korean War, which is a very serious issue with a lot of grievances that continues in South Korea and North Korea. And we should call North Korea to please accept a new event of reunion of separated families. Sorry. There are conditions for a virtual communication, and there is a need to do it because all these families are very aged, and there is no time for them to do it. Now, what I'm trying to say is that when I started to look into the situation of women leaving North Korea and arriving to South Korea, almost all of these women, they are leaving families in the North. Some of them, they are leaving children in China. So I called it a second cycle of separated families from the Korean Peninsula, which is actually what it is. When you talk to these escapees to seek their stories and to listen their testimonies and to understand what's happening in North, sometimes they do not tell you. They prefer to keep silence about what is the family situation. And once you start trying to dig into what happened, suddenly you listen to war stories about separation of families. That's what I call them, a new cycle of separated families. most of them remain in South Korea. Only few of them leave South Korea to some other countries. And as far as I know, there is a community in London, in a neighborhood called Little Pyongyang. There are some in Canada, some in the US, but that's it. I think there is not a comprehensive policy by international community to deal with the escapees from North Korea, and it's only South Korea the place where they finally they stay.
Tomás, thank you very much. We're approaching, well, 4 p.m. your time, 3 p.m. our time, but you have very kindly agreed to go into overtime if we have more questions. We do have a lot of questions, and I hope our participants will bear with me. We will go a little bit into overtime. It's a very precious moment and a very precious opportunity talking to the UN Special Rapporteur, Tomás Ojea Quintana. Tomás, I'm going to go to the next question or questions, coming from a former very senior US diplomat, currently vice president of the Korea Economic Institute in Washington, D.C., Mark Tokola. Special Rapporteur Quintana, do you have any information about how many North Korean workers continue to work in foreign countries? Are their human rights being violated?
Very important question, relevant not only to the human rights institutions of the United Nations or the Human Rights Council in Geneva, but also relevant for the Security Council, because this is an issue which has been included in the sanctions regime, which, by the way, I would like also later to make a point on the sanctions regime of the Security Council. That includes the issue of overseas workers. That's the way that was defined. How many of them remain? What we know from the reports from the panel of experts of the sanctions committee is that many countries that used to host these workers have returned them to North Korea. Now, what don't know is what's the situation in China and in Russia. Unfortunately, I received reports about overseas workers still being in China and in Russia. I don't have the figures, but it seems that they have reduced a lot after the Security Councils decided to include that activity as an activity sanctioned by them. I was in Bangkok last year as well, and I remember a restaurant in Bangkok, Pyongyang restaurant. I don't recall the name. I visited Bangkok twice as a reporter, DPRK reporter, and the second time that restaurant was closed. So there was no longer overseas workers. So it seems that in the majority of the countries that used to have overseas workers, they returned that to the country. Now, the human rights question is very important, and I have trying to address it and understand what was their situation. Of course, as a matter of principle, these workers working abroad, they were subject completely under the control of the North Korean authorities in those countries, completely supervised, subject to surveillance, not allowed to move. So, of course, from that point of view, yes, it is. Their rights were not being respected at all. Then when we talk about the labor conditions, there has been a lot of discussions with regards to who holds the responsibility. It is the North Koreans delegations in those countries. It is the private company. It is the host country who has the responsibility to comply with labor standards. In my view, are especially the last two, the host country and the private company. Those are the actors who hold the responsibility to respect labor standards, which in some cases were real appalling in some countries, and people living in the same compounds where they were working, having, as I say, restrictive in their movement. And on top of that, then there was a discussion about their salaries, their wages. And what has been reported is that large portion of those wages were taken by the authorities of North Korea, which basically it is why the system was implemented in North Korea. Now, I always try to have also a different angle to analyze the situation, because what we also know is that in North Korea, the system of overseas workers is a system that people actually, workers actually want to apply to. There is a system where they accept their willingness to basically go to work abroad. So it's part of the endemic. So the overseas workers system is a part of the endemic, and broken system, collective political system in North Korea. But people value those kind of works. The hard currency that the small portion of hard currency that they receive is very useful for them and their families. So that's an angle that I also try to contemplate when writing these cases. That's all what I can say about it. I recall meeting in South Korea people who were part of the system, who worked abroad, and they were really expressing a lot of complaints about the treatment of the manager, the conditions of labor. So definitely this entails, or compromises human rights.
Tomás, thank you. Next, I have an anonymous question from a secretary to a member of the South Korean National Assembly. Well, I have a strong suspicion as to who that is, but I'm not going to mention it. It's a great question. Special Rapporteur Quintana, I would like to know your opinion about the new strategy of the South Korean Ministry of Unification trying to barter with the North Korean regime for humanitarian reasons. So instead of having money exchange hands in the process, trying to barter. And this is a question that has come from a couple of other participants as well.
It's very important, and I understand concerns, but you should know that I always call for the need to provide humanitarian assistance to North Korea, and of course I always receive different kind of responses from governments. Some governments say it's up to the government of North Korea to assist their people and not divert the money to the nuclear program, or that the humanitarian aid is not actually being controlled by the providers, and there is no really information about where the aid goes, and then it goes to the the whole circuit of corruption in the system. I understand all those views, but I respond that as a matter of principle, humanitarian aid should not be politicized, should respond to the principle of neutrality, independence, and impartiality. These are principles which combined indicate that whatever the situation is, even the situation in North Korea, which is one of the worst situations in the world in terms of human rights abuses, in terms of isolation, in terms of engagement, in terms of lack of connection to the outside world. Even in the worst conditions, humanitarian aid continues to be applied. So I don't have a clear picture of whether or not this decision from the newly appointed Minister of Unification goes in this direction. If it has to do with providing humanitarian help to North Korea. But if that's the case, I am very clear, I support that. And I support that, and I made my point with this administration, and I made my point with the previous administration when I assumed in 2016, and I met many officials from the previous administration. I said, I support humanitarian assistance, and they will have some they will have reservations about providing humanitarian aid, but I made my point and I have been consistent about it. That's how the United Nations operates, not only in North Korea, but also all over the world. And I always try to move myself from politicization of all these issues, which I understand. I do not condemn political views and political analysis and political stances, but to protect this mandate, to protect the importance of trying to improve the human rights, I always try to avoid politicization. I hope that responds to that question. I don't know, Greg, if there are some questions with regards to sanctions, by the way, but maybe you let me know, we can continue.
If you're okay with this, those friends of ours who can stay with us, please stay with us. You're so kind, spending so much time with us. We will definitely go to sanctions. Before that, there are two participants who have been very patiently waiting, Mrs. Anna Tokareva and my colleague, Ha-Young Pek. They're asking questions along the same lines. Special Rapporteur Quintana, how do you assess the influence of a recent reshuffle in country leadership, including the delegation of powers in foreign policy, economics, and also war issues on the questions of human rights? May we expect any substantial implications from this shuffle or reshuffle in country leadership? And how about the new role of Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong? Do you think that her enhanced role might have an impact in terms of the state of human rights in North Korea?
We are watching closely these movements within the different players in the governing bodies in North Korea, because yes, definitely they could have an impact on the human rights, different areas of human rights, and actually the latest Central Committee meeting where the leadership, Kim Jong-un, somehow accepted that the 5 years economic plan did not offer the results that was expected, was something that we should follow closely. I think it's an interesting, I would put it like this, I think it's an interesting statement from the leadership from North Korea. It's a recognition of the fact that something wrong that something wrong happened, and I take this statement as a recognition of responsibility of the leadership of the failure of the 5 years economic plan. And the fact that there is a call for a Congress party in January should also be a decision and an event in the future that should make us think about what that means. and also to see if there's going to be any window of opportunity to bring by the United Nations and other stakeholders ideas and proposals on how to, what will be the 5 years the new 5 years economic plan that we want to see the United Nations and the human rights advocates. What is it, the 5 year economic plan that we would like to see? We need to go on board and prepare ourselves to say, this is what needs to be, these are decisions that you need to take. You failed. These are decisions you need to take not to fail. This is more, general analysis, of course, it's general analysis. But I think we need to follow up these developments, especially in the context of the COVID-19 and what will happen, because this virus is not going away. And if the government of North Korea thinks that it is over by closing borders and containing the outbreak, it's going to be wrong, because the virus is not going away. And it could be any time that the outbreak will hit the country, and that could be a disaster. And I think that they are starting to understand that this is the situation. And so we need to see, we need to follow closely about it. With regards to the leadership sister, I really don't have much to say other than the fact that her role in the rapprochement between South Korea and North Korea was very important. Was very important at that time. Her visit to her presence at the Winter of Olympics in 2018, and also her role in the rapprochement, it was very important. It was very important. I hope that she could continue in the same line within the government in North Korea. Having said that, I should say that when she was the one who launched the offensive against the defectors with a statement in the state media, I was really disappointed. And actually, I came out with a public statement condemning those statements and saying that the defectors should not be subject to re-victimization.
Tomás, thank you very much. Along the lines of your excellent statement on COVID, I have a question from Elizabeth Shim with United Press International. How much access does the World Health Organization have to North Korean communities? WHO has recently stated that there are no confirmed cases of coronavirus in the country, quoting North Korean officials. Thank you very much.
Well, we are talking about the current situation, and I said already that the UN, the humanitarian country team, that's how it's called, in the field in Pyongyang, has been reduced drastically in their staff, and the operations are being blocked. So for the time being, there is no access, as far as I know. Maybe I am outdated of what's happening today, but this is the information that I have. So not having access, even for those who used to have access, again, is very, very serious development with regards to knowing and having accurate information about the situation on the ground.
Thank you very much. We also have a question from Dorothy Saab, who's been patiently waiting. Special Rapporteur, do you know if the High Commissioner for Human Rights or even the Secretary General has raised the recent OHCHR report that you mentioned on the status of women in detention in particular with the government of China? That's the first question. Also, has your work or that of the OHCHR office in Seoul been affected by the financial crisis currently facing the UN and the UN's human rights program in particular?
I think they should. They should share the report, and they should reach out to the Chinese government. I mean, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, because that report with regards to the situation of women or the treatment of women upon after repatriation has, of course, is related, of course, to the role of the government of China that we just discussed during this meeting. So they should. I don't know if that happened, to be honest. I don't know. I think the government of China, as I say, at least in my relationship, have been reluctant to recognize what are their responsibilities. But that doesn't mean that you can have a dialogue, that you can exchange views, and you need to relate, because that's the way it works. So I think OHCHR should reach out to the Chinese authorities on this report. To be honest, I don't know if that happened. And the other question was about, sorry.
The other question was about the way that the OHCHR office in Seoul in particular has been affected by the financial crisis. Tomás, one important clarification. The name of the participant is Doris Saab, but actually the one asking the question is our good friend Kristen Broker at the Jacob Blaustein Institute in New York City. You know her very well. She's apparently using a colleague's account, so great to hear from you, Kristen. So again, the question is, how is the OHCHR office affected by current financial difficulties affecting the UN and the human rights program in particular?
But going back to the first part of the question, Christian, it is very important, and I understand your point. We shouldn't be allowing ourselves to be neglecting our responsibility to raise issues. And I understand your point, and I made these points when I can with colleagues from OHCHR and other bodies. You could be respectful, you could be friendly, you can even be pro-engagement, you can try to engage, but don't avoid the chance to ask about their views with regards to an important report that recollects important testimonies of how women were sent by the security forces of China to the security forces of North Korea. With regards to funding, yes, it has been affecting somehow the UN work, but at the same time, because of the COVID-19, impediments, we are not allowed to travel, And by the way, this is something that I wanted to say. For mandate holders, special reporters, the chance to travel, and for many of you, of course, as well, but for us, the possibility to travel to the specific places and areas where you can get a direct perception of the situation, to look people into their eyes, to feel the political environment. It's indispensable to carry out our jobs. And that's why it's very unfortunate, and I feel personally very challenged to really speak about the North Korean situation, and actually to report to the General Assembly. I will report, you should know, in October to the third committee of the General Assembly. It will be a virtual reporting, and I do feel very challenged by this situation, because that's not the usual way that the way that we usually do our jobs. I really feel that I'm missing a lot of things and point of view and the perceptions, as I say. But in some areas, it's having an impact. I don't think to the Seoul office so far has been hit by this, and also our colleagues leading the desk office of North Korea in Geneva as well. So fortunately, this remains the same. Again, I don't know what will be the situation if I have to travel, to Seoul. I have a lot of plans to travel to Europe and to some other parts of the world, even to Malaysia. But that's the situation.
Tomás, thank you very much. Of course, you have been so generous with your time. We cannot abuse your generosity for much longer. I will have just two more questions. One comes from Mrs. Pak Una, who is asking, today we have discussed the situation of North Korean human rights NGOs and North Korean human rights defenders in South Korea. They are under pressure. They are under threat. What would be your recommendations and advice to North Korean human rights groups and defenders in South Korea? And the final question comes from me, your moderator. What message would you like to deliver to the people of North Korea?
Okay. So for our friends and colleagues of the human rights organizations and the Defectors organizations, first, let me be very honest. If you felt sometime that I was not really giving voice to your concerns and your fears, please let me know. And also reach out to me, because I'm here to basically give voice to those who are committed to the importance of improving human rights of the people in North Korea. Second, I proposed the Seoul office to play an important role in trying to moderate the policy from the South Korean government. And I'm pushing for that, and I encourage you to reach out to the colleagues from Seoul office and to try to have the government responding to them and also accepting an intermediate role on this issue. You should also, and this is a humble advice, maybe there is a time also to further elaborate what is the relationship, a message with regards to what is the relationship between human rights and humanitarian. Because what I don't like when I go to South Korea is how issues are being, separated completely from each other. I do see a connection between the struggle for human rights and humanitarian. I do see a connection between the need for human rights respect and the initiative of peace. So maybe to reframe your message with regards to what are your aims and what are your commitments could be also a way out of this, and could put the position of the government, the current administration, put the current administration in a difficult position, because they cannot neglect the importance of defending human rights, and just speak about humanitarian and cooperation and peace. So it's all connected. So that's a humble advice, but that's all what I can say about it. And of course, as I say, I am the process of drafting the formal communication to the government. Hopefully that will come out soon, depending on the decision that we'll make with our colleagues from other mandates. But that's and I will continue to respond to the media inquiries about it, and also try to make my points with the government. Unfortunately, again, I don't have the possibility to travel to Seoul. The best way to put to bring clarity of what is the role, what is the way that the government should go forward with this political decision, it was to be there, and to have discussions and to make a point and to have a press conference and to help the organizations. So before Greg to conclude with your response, let me say that this kind of thought that when I look into the human rights situation, I look into both civil and political rights and economic and social and cultural rights. We are very concerned about the right to food, the right to health, education, as well as lack of freedoms and so forth. When I look into the situation of economic, social, and cultural rights, I am obliged to look into what is happening with the sanctions regime of the Security Council, and what is the impact of the sanctions regime into the economic, social, and cultural rights, and also into the impact on the humanitarian assistance in North Korea. But then when I look into the sanctions regime, I see that the sanctions regime comes from the intention to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, which is very important. And the government of North Korea needs to comply with the principle of non-proliferation and on all of that. But then when I look into the denuclearization goal, I see that it is connected with the issue of peace. Lack of peace agreement in the Korean Peninsula, basically, it's a major problem that somehow is connected to the nuclear program of North Korea. And then I cannot disassociate a peace environment with the enjoyment of human rights. It is all connected at the end. It is all connected. That's why I sometimes introduce in my reports an analysis of the sanctions regime, and I am calling the sanctions committee to have standing exceptions, for example, and I'm calling the Secretary General to issue a comprehensive report on the impact of sanctions. I wanted to make this point at the end, and finally, you asked me to send a message to the North Korean people. Now, for the time being, the only ones who can listen to us or to me are those North Korean people living in South Korea. The North Koreans living in the North are being kept in isolation. I know that some colleagues from the media, especially those radios who broadcast to North Korea, have the possibility, but other than that, they are not connected to the outside world. So it's very difficult to frame a message to them that they cannot hear to me. But we can feel positive about the future and leave a message to them once North Korea opens up and we have the possibility to push for improvement of the human rights situation. And that scenario, I could say that they should know that there are many people around the world in organizations willing to help them in enjoy a better life, and that their dignity is respected, and that we will never stop in our struggle until that happens.
Tomás, thank you very much. You have been so generous with your time and expertise. 44 participants have stayed with us. Words cannot express my gratitude for everything you do for this worthy cause of ours. You're a hero and a role model to us all, sir. And I look forward to staying in touch. I look forward to your next program, hopefully in person, hopefully in Washington, D.C. I hope we will overcome this global pandemic very soon. In the meantime, please do let us know if there is any way my organization, the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, HRNK, can provide support. Please let us know if any of the NGOs in our world of North Korean human rights can provide any support. Again, we are cheering for you. We are fully behind you. Thank you so much. We highly appreciate it. Best wishes to you and your family. May you be healthy, strong, and in great spirits at all times. Thank you, Tomás.
Thank you very much, Greg, for this opportunity. And if I am a hero, we are all heroes. There's no difference. So thank you again.
Thank you, sir. Have a wonderful weekend.
Okay, bye.